All right, here we go. I've been teaching classes on Islam since about 2005. I've actually been studying Islam for a number of years, since approximately 1999. And I've discovered some things about Islam over the years that really trouble me. As I'm teaching my classes, inevitably somebody will say something like, hold on just a minute. What you just said contradicts something that you said earlier. And I'll tell them, well, that may be, perhaps, but it's contradictory not because I'm contradicting myself, but because Islam, internally, is inconsistent and contradictory. Now, I'm going to be talking about a number of these topics over the next coming weeks and months. I'm going to be putting videos up here on YouTube concerning Muhammad, concerning the Quran, concerning objections that Muslims raise against Christianity, and how to answer those. But for today, I just want to tackle one particular subject, actually maybe a couple. I want to talk about a couple internal inconsistencies within Islam. And the first one has to do with the doctrine of salvation. Now, Islam teaches that we're saved by acquiring good works. There are two angels that follow us around, one on each shoulder. After we're born, these angels are assigned to us. One records our good deeds, one records our bad deeds. And on the day of judgment, our good deeds and our bad deeds will be placed on opposite sides of a scale, and whichever side of the scale is heavier will determine our eternal destiny, whether it's in paradise or heaven, whatever term you want to use, or whether our eternal abode is in hell. Now, we get this idea in the Quran, in several places in the Quran. Surah 7, chapter 7, verses 6 through 9, say, "Those whose scales are heavy, they will be the successful. But those whose scales are light are those who will lose their own selves in hell." Surah 101, the entire chapter of chapter 101, Surah 101, talks about this very idea of our deeds being weighed on scales. Verses 6 through 9 of Surah 101 read, "As for him whose balance of good deeds is heavy, he will live a pleasant life in paradise. But for him whose balance will be light, he will have his home in hell." Again, we find this idea repeated in Surah 23, chapter 23 of the Quran, verses 101 through 104, and in Surah 21, 47. So it's very clear when we read the Quran that our eternal salvation, our eternal destiny after our life on earth is done, is based on whether we have acquired enough good deeds to outweigh the bad deeds that we have done. Now, that becomes a little complicated. It becomes a little internally inconsistent when we look at the nature of God in Islam, Allah. There are many things we could say about Allah, and we'll be addressing those in the coming weeks. But one of the aspects we find about Allah when we read the Quran is that Allah controls everything that man does. Everything is by Allah's will. Now think about that for a moment. Your good deeds that you do are by Allah's will. The bad deeds that you do are by Allah's will, are controlled by Allah. Don't believe me? Listen to what the Quran says. Surah 4, chapter 4 of the Quran, verse 119. "I will mislead them and create in them false desires." Surah 14, chapter 14, verse 4 says, "Allah misleads whom He wills, and He guides whom He wills." Chapter 4, Surah 4 of the Quran, verse 88. Surah 4:88. "He whom Allah sends astray, never will you find for him a way of guidance." Surah 4, verse 143. "He whom Allah sends astray, you will not find for him a way to the truth." Surah 18, verse 17. "He whom Allah guides is rightly guided, but he whom He leads astray, for him you will find no friend to lead him." So we see in the Quran that even though on Judgment Day our deeds are going to be weighed, good deeds, bad deeds, and our scale, whichever way the scale tilts, will determine our eternal destiny. If it's good, we'll be ushered into paradise or heaven, hopefully. There's no guarantee in Islamic theology. But if our deeds are bad, if the side of our scale that's heaviest is on our bad deeds, then we'll be sent to hell. Now here's the internal inconsistency. If our bad deeds are caused by Allah, and we just read many verses in the Quran that says, "He whom Allah leads astray, for him there will be no one to lead him to the truth." Allah leads astray whom He will, and He guides whom He will. So if our bad deeds are caused by Allah, as well as our good deeds, And if our bad deeds outweigh our good deeds, then what right does Allah have to judge us for the bad deeds that He causes us to commit? That is internally inconsistent. That is not a God of justice. That is not just, even though Muslims will tell you Allah is a God of justice. That cannot be a just God, punishing you for something that He Himself causes you to do. Now that's a problem for Islam. I'd like to hear what Muslims have to say about that problem. I've asked it before. I've never heard a reasonable explanation.